Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Backlog Banter. I'm Tucker Hazel. This is Abram Buhner,
True.
and today we're here to talk about Astro Bot, the latest and potentially greatest from PlayStation Studios. Team Asobi has whipped something up special in their
Yeah.
little kitchen, and we're here to discuss it alongside a little bit of feedback from our community. Frankly, not enough. You sorry bastards. Abram,
Yeah.
give me your thoughts on Astro Bot, a game that you sort of drank in, you took your time with it, and now
Yeah.
you're digesting it.
This is true. I mean, it probably took me like a whole 4 days to beat
Yeah,
the
I
game or
know.
something.
But compared to so many people that I know who finished it in 24
I guess
hours,
that's fair enough.
that is a luxurious, sumptuous meal.
I guess so. Astrobot's my favorite game on PS5, and I don't mean that like it's my favorite PlayStation Studios game. I just mean like of all the games on this stupid console that I've had since launch, it's my favorite of them. I'm really excited to talk about Astrobot, about what works for me so well about it, but I'm also excited to sort of have the larger and, in my opinion, in some ways more interesting conversation about sort of where Astrobot and Team Asobi fit into the larger PlayStation Studios narrative. Let's call them complex feelings this game has evoked for a lot of people with the VIP bots, which reference franchises are gone. This is going to be sort of it is a review and part of Astrobot, but it's a larger conversation, I think, about what this sort of means for PlayStation, like a time capsule of their past, but also sort of a letter to their future. So, yeah, I think Astrobot's excellent. But it wasn't a surprise. That's the other thing we should add. I mean, I played Rescue Mission. I don't remember when I got a PSVR, when it was cheap. So like 2019 maybe or so.
Sounds about right.
And I thought that was great. I especially love Playroom, mostly because Playroom doesn't make me ill to play.
Yes.
So I knew that Astrobot was going to be
You don't have to wear a
fantastic.
gizmo.
You don't have to wear a gizmo. But I didn't expect Asobi to take their game up to this level, because I feel like it's a demonstrable and categorical upgrade against both their previous work, but then also most other AAA 3D platformers right now.
Yeah, this game is really interesting to talk about because any way you point at it, there's an interesting conversation to be had.
Yeah.
I actually think in some ways, like, the design of itself is maybe the least interesting part of the game because it's just rock solid.
Yeah.
And there's lots of great mechanics, and it looks great, and it runs great, and it's fun, and it's colorful, and we'll definitely be getting into that. But I think for me, having, as like you, played both Playroom and Rescue Mission, and for me, having platinumed both of those, in Rescue Mission, I actually only played about 3 months ago, so it's much more fresh in my mind. So instead of it being 4 years since I'd played an Astro Bot game, it had been a couple months.
Yeah.
But that, I think, colors my impressions on this game in an interesting light, because the fact of the matter is, and why I say the design of Astro Bot is maybe the thing to me that is least interesting to discuss about it, it is very similar. It is very similar to Rescue Mission and to Playroom, and that is not a bad thing, and I actually think it's an important thing. So I'm going to frame any even mild criticisms that I have about this game through the lens of it being very similar to the two previous games, and that making it feel a little bit rote. But I understand when you slice budgeting, when you slice production, when you slice the way that Astro as a character has not been given a full chance to shine like this before. I understand where these decisions are made on a production level. It'll be like, let's reuse some bosses, let's reuse physics, let's reuse mechanics, because we're putting our effort into expanding, into using the solid foundation we have, into creating a bigger world, more levels, more mechanics, more ideas, faster loading, all of these things. It's built on top of a solid framework that has been built upon, which is frankly something we see a lot of people complain about in the industry of like, oh, we're using the same engine again, we're using these animations again. But the truth of the matter is, iteration, I think, is just as important as evolution. And Team Asobi, I think, really makes that clear by making 3 games that on a mechanics level, physics level, visual level are very, very similar. But you get a lot out of, you get different things out of each of them because they're able to, over the course of the last, let's just say 7 years, developing all 3 of these games, work on these things, refine them, and we get to Astro Bot, which is just a polished game. I never got a bug in this game, never got a crash, the visuals, the frame rate, nothing, there's no hitches at all. It's because they knew where to make the decisions of, we're going to reuse this, we're going to reuse that, and not start completely from scratch, but polish up what we have before and present it as the title Astro Bot. This is kind of like the first Astro Bot game in what will hopefully become a more long-running series of straight down the line home console adventure games, in the way that Playroom was tech demo, Rescue Mission was a VR game. There are caveats to the other ones. I like Astro Bot as a as a hard reset of
Yeah.
this is the true beginning for Astro Bot, and I love that.
Well, I think it's actually introduced as sort of part of the meta conversation on the game, because the game's not selling well.
Yeah, yeah.
By all indication we have, which is not a ton at the point in time that we're recording.
Yeah, it's barely been out a week.
Right, but we know that it performed weaker than Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart in the UK, a game that didn't turn a profit.
Yeah.
However, its budget was assumedly much higher than this game's budget. And we also know that in physical sales in Japan, it came second to some fucking random game I've never heard of. I don't know what that is. It's important to note that the UK is a big market for PlayStation. Physical PlayStation 5 sales in Japan are not really something that moves the needle ever.
Yeah.
But it's not a super strong indication, and obviously no statement from PlayStation saying, hey, we sold 1 million copies in the first 3 days of release.
Which they love to do.
And I don't think that Astro will get there.
No. They didn't do that for Concord either.
For some reason. But the reason I contextualize all this is because, you're talking about Astro Bot from this perspective of somebody who's very familiar with Astro and have played all the past games and see it as, in some ways, so similar, but in some ways a fresh start, as you're saying, which I think is an interesting point.
But I'm talking about that from not only my experience, but I think that's also what, on a design level and a marketing level, that was intended as. So whether or not that hits, whether or not that becomes the refresh point where they then are making an Astro Bot 2 or whatever, we don't know if that's the case. But that's certainly what was intended with the way they made this game.
Well, I think the reason I raised it is because I was talking with our friend Botox Games, recently about the
shout out
seeming underperformance game. Sure. Again, we need to see how it does in bigger markets, which are a little bit harder to parse. Yeah. But assuming that it is tracking soft, I was wondering if Playroom actually had a markedly negative impact on Astro Bot.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of the success of Astro Bot is success to people like us who are really intrinsically interested in 3D platformers, who are really intrinsically interested in Team Asobi.
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit of a challenging game to sell from a higher level, particularly when you see Playroom as a PlayStation 5 owner, an average PlayStation 5 owner. Maybe you're buying into this console because you love what PlayStation Studios has been for the last several years. Yeah. You want that big cinematic adventure, and you see Playroom, you don't play Playroom. You see Astro Bot and say, well, I already have Playroom, right? And so I guess
we already have Playroom at home.
Exactly. And so I guess my larger question to you kind of is
Astro Bot at home, I guess.
Do you think that in some ways it was a mistake to have the game be as similar as it was, a mistake to sort of position it, title it the way that they did?
I don't think that there's any better way to sell this game. I think a different kind of game that had a longer marketing cycle, that maybe had a little bit more focus on story and cutscenes and things that might appeal more to the hardcore PlayStation demographic, that might have sparked a little bit more interest. But for what it is, and especially on the budget scale that is, and on the development scale that it had, these were the right decisions to make. That mean, even if it doesn't sell exorbitantly well, it is more than likely going to be profitable, or at least safe to continue Asobi's future development. It was those decisions that they made to reuse things, to make it in a similar engine and things, and not completely reinvent the wheel, that kept that budget tight and small with a small team. So these decisions, I think, were made in the right way. It will just be interesting to see if this does not pan out, because they gave this their all, full development time, put it on PlayStation 5, closing the showcase. Like, this was the full force effort. If that doesn't pay off, what do they then spin out to? Is it a new IP? Is it Astro Bot reinvented again into something that is a little bit more bombastic and more higher production value, which might end up paying off? But then that puts Asobi in the place where we are certainly going to talk about, though I think we should shift gears to talking a little bit more about the game in specific. Asobi, what makes them special is the fact that they aren't making the big budget, high spectacle, massive budget games that sets them apart from the rest of PlayStation Studios. And so we don't want them to become that. But if this doesn't do well, they might have to pivot to that. I don't know. It's a very, very interesting thing.
Well, just the reason I raise it is because I was thinking about the PlayStation 5 Pro announcement. And in there, they make a song and dance. Well, that's hyperbole. But they say in the blog post, PlayStation blog that you get your PS5 Pro and it comes with a copy of Astro's Playroom
Oh, okay.
built in.
Oh, interesting.
They shut that out specifically.
Yeah.
Now we know that that's built into every PlayStation
Yes.
5 model, so to us that's
Yeah.
just drummed up marketing speak for an intrinsic feature.
Yeah.
But I think it leaves Astro in a strange position ultimately, because the full game is still in some ways playing second fiddle to this free thing that everybody
Yeah,
gets.
that's fair enough.
And I guess to bring it more to the game a little bit,
Mm.
the discussion around Astro Bot
Yeah.
since its reveal a couple months ago was in large part about those PlayStation cameos,
Mhm.
because they really do hammer those home in the marketing.
Absolutely.
And to close the loop on this dimension of the meta conversation,
Yeah.
I think that was in part intentional to try to make this game more viral, more marketable.
I absolutely think
Because
so, yeah.
when I look at Astrobot, having now completed it,
Mhm.
obviously the PlayStation cameos, the VIP bots, all this stuff is a special part of the experience.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's as dominant over Astrobot as particularly I think some of those early trailers
No, yeah.
illustrate.
Yeah.
And so I think that's another reason why it's hard, right? Because Playdate does this too. You can find Playroom. Sorry, I don't know why I keep saying Playdate. You can
Fuck
find
off, Panic.
you can find plenty of the actually probably same VIP bots in Playroom that you can find here. And so I think it just becomes challenging to prove to people who don't finish their games that often, just thinking statistically, well, why do you need to go out and get Astrobot when what you've marketed is what they already have?
Yeah.
And I think that's in part, and we've been talking this with Concord as well,
Yeah.
in part a failure on PlayStation's behalf to really market their games this year in an effective way.
Mm-hmm.
It's especially interesting this isn't the holiday game that's going to Horizon. I think it'd be very interesting to see if there are PS5 Slim bundles this Christmas with Lego Horizon Adventures instead of Astrobot.
Very likely.
I think so too. But I think there's a world, in my opinion, where Astro got announced earlier. It had more time to marinate, wherein, as we can talk about now, the real unique strengths of this game were played up higher. Because to me, I think this is all about those, like, for lack of a better term, like animal backpack power-ups. And the level design concepts and the theming. I think that this is a much stronger step in the direction for establishing a world for Astrobot than I anticipated.
Yeah, definitely.
Based on how they were showing that game off before it came out.
Yeah, we talked quite a bit about Astro in a couple of videos earlier in the year, just after it got announced, about how heavily the PlayStation history element of the game was weighing on the identity of Astrobot as a character in a world and a place that people get attached to for its own merits rather than because it acts as a vehicle for other things. And I'm going to meet you halfway because I do think that Astrobot, this game, is the strongest version of a world and identity that Astro has ever gotten, and I would certainly like to see that built upon in the future. But I think, again, going back to some of the design and production constraints that this game had on it to keep its budget small and to make this what it ended up being, I do think there are some setbacks for that or things that don't quite evolve it as much. Because again, and I think this is very important, and I think the game is great because of it, this is iteration and not evolution. But so you can talk a little bit about Astro's world and the characters for this. Because my biggest critique of the game is that it reuses almost every boss fight. Not design-wise, they're doing different attack patterns, but I faced this octopus before, I faced the gorilla before, I faced the bird before, because I played Rescue Mission and Playroom. And those characters, those bosses, I don't remember exactly, it's been a long time since I played Playroom, but they've definitely reused them at least once, if not twice, if not three times. And I think that made some of these boss fights that are very fun on a mechanical level feel less special. And I also still do harbor some of the complaints that I held when we reviewed Playroom 4 years ago, that I don't think on a visual and design language level that almost any of the characters that inhabit the Astrobot world are particularly interesting. I have no care to remember their names or to remember their designs. The boss fights are fun. The music is great, but on a design level, I don't think Astrobot is particularly strong, and so I will continue to champion the fact that I think Astro needs the PlayStation stuff to maintain relevance, because I do not believe that Astro on its own merits is strong enough to garner even my interest, frankly.
Then what do you think they do for the next game?
More PlayStation stuff. Double down on it. Yeah, make every world a spin on Patapon, Twisted Metal, Sly Cooper, Infamous.
Yeah.
I think that would certainly drum up more interest, give that a longer marketing cycle, get a couple of big like E3 style moments where it's like all like big music and like look at the characters coming together. I think that that's probably what they're going to need to lean into, because I think that that's where most of the interest for this the game lies. Not because I think that's necessarily fair. I do think the game has a lot of quality in its own areas that I'll talk about in terms of visuals and design. But on a visual language level, this game does lean less heavily on the PlayStation reference stuff on a like when you're playing the game basis, but in terms of where my mind goes, it's still not on the levels and the enemies and things like that, and Astro himself.
You know, it's interesting because I've had PlayStation systems my entire life. My PS2 is my first actual console.
Sure.
But I have a much more limited reverence for PlayStation history than you do, just by merit of the fact that that's not what I was playing when I was a kid.
Yeah.
That's not what I was playing on my PS4, even as all that stuff is coming back in PS2 Classics or whatever.
Sure.
I didn't really, it just wasn't really my thing. So when
now you can go play Mr. Mosquito.
Now I can play Skygunner next week, which is exciting. But I come at Astro Bot with a reverence in sort of in a general sense for PlayStation history. And otherwise, I'm here for a really good 3D platformer.
Sure.
And I think what's interesting about the role of the PlayStation stuff in this game is that it almost feels like a dead end. And I mean that sort of in a good way, because you get a VIP bot and either you know them or you don't.
Sure.
And if you don't know them, there's no real recourse to figuring out what they are.
No.
There's really, aside from the like ostensibly bonus levels at the end of each world to get the various PlayStation part that are actually in the gameplay style of these series, on a mechanical level in the hub or anything, none of these bots had to be themed as VIPs.
Sure, not required.
There's no mechanical reason.
No, and the only difference between the generic Astro bots and the VIP bots are the fact that the VIP bots have the gotcha machine things that you can expand sort of their little PlayStation character identity.
Yeah.
But you're right, on a mechanical level, when you whistle them over and they make a bridge, Joel and Ellie are grabbing onto the feet of 400 other little Astro bots.
Right. And so to me, that was to the benefit of the game, because I think that this sort of wink and a nod is useful for people like you who get it.
Yeah.
But I feel like this game is so much less contingent on this understanding of PlayStation than a game like Smash Brothers is. And I was talking about this in our Discord. I feel like the intent of some other crossover games, Smash being a great example, is understanding.
Sure.
And either pre-existing understanding or building familiarity with what you know, with what you are yet to understand.
Sure.
So Terry Bogard at Smash is a great example. Sakurai makes a big song and dance about how much he loves King of Fighters. They discount those King of Fighters games. We go play that. You're playing as Terry Bogard on the King of Fighters stage. It's got mechanics and everything that are intrinsically King of Fighters. And you need that, or I think Smash Bros. Becomes a much less compelling game.
Sure.
I don't think that's true for Astro Bot. And I think that they smartly walked this line here where the wink and the nod is great.
Yeah.
The bonus stages are great.
Yeah.
But if you don't know what any of that shit means,
it's still a fun game. It's still a great game.
I think it's like a 10% change.
Yeah, sure.
Really.
Now we've got a visitor. Tanner Dykstra is army crawling on the floor. He is bringing me my computer charger because I'm an idiot and did not bring my computer charger down.
Look at that.
There we go. Now we can actually do a long video.
Where does this go? Does this go here?
Yeah. It goes in any hole. That's the beauty of USB-C, baby. I can charge my phone with this. I can charge my Switch with this. I can charge my Concord DualSense controller with this.
There we go. I appreciate you army crawling as though it was going to be a secret.
Yes.
That we weren't going to acknowledge you, but we did. So it's just for my benefit and my amusement. So I like that.
Back to Astro Bot.
Thank you, Tanner. I think that that's important. And that's why I think that Asobi is at an interesting crossroads.
Sure. Yeah.
Because to what extent do you really move the needle in Astro Bot's sequel in terms of getting more people involved? If you do as they do here for Loco Roco, and it is, if you don't know Loco Roco, just a kind of a cool level, but the amount of people who know Loco Roco come into this game is not particularly big, right? No. And so that's why I think the future of Astro Bot's in a very precarious position, unless they lean further into the PlayStation history and using this as a resource. Whereas like Smash Brothers, because I
Yeah.
don't think Astro Bot is that resource.
Sure.
I don't think you even really feel inspired to go and learn what a VIP bot is if you don't know it. At least I didn't.
Yeah.
I get a guy, I see him, like, I don't know who that is. I read the little tag, and then he's gone.
Yeah.
You know,
He
he's in my horde.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying this as a criticism.
No, of
I'm
course,
saying
yeah.
it more to say that in practice, I think that the game is less concerned with the history of PlayStation beyond aesthetics than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting balance because I think this game kind of turns off and on its reverence, which I think is fascinating. And let's talk about the bulk of this game, which is not the PlayStation reverence, which is not the VIP bots or those VIP levels. Most of this game is just rock solid 3D platforming levels that are very creative and visually interesting and colorful and varied with the different mechanics and the different level themes. They come up with all sorts of very cool ideas. And that's really where this game shines and what makes it a Game of the Year contender for you. One of, if not the best game that PlayStation has made in a very long time.
And since Last of Us 2.
Yeah.
I guess.
And of this generation, certainly one that stands out to the hardcore PlayStation crowd. People are loving this game. And it's because what I started my conversation with, this is a building upon a foundation and a polishing of that foundation, an expansion of that foundation. And that just makes this game really fun to play. Lots of little surprises. It is about the amount of polish and about the amount of attention to detail that I think makes this as a AAA 3D platformer feel so distinct. The only other games that have gotten to this level of 3D platforming polish and attention to detail are in the last 7 years: Super Mario Odyssey, Psychonauts 2, Ratchet and Clank, It Takes Two, and I think all of these games are 9 or 10 out of 10s. They're amazing, and Astro Bot introduces its own flavor to that by having the world feel more like a toy box, in the way that everything has a little bit of animation, a little bit of sound effects. They really use the SSD of the PlayStation 5 not to render the biggest vistas, not to render the fastest load times, even though the load times are great in this, but to put shit everywhere. There's just little bibbles and bobbles and little things and gold nuggets and gems and coins and all this stuff, and 300 of your Astrobot little guys running around and making piles and like creating bridges and stuff, and it creates a sense of like energy and whimsy, and like it has like an electric buzz to it that is just so fun to hop into any level and wade across like the little flowers or grass or whatever, or like go punch a bush or something and watch the particles go everywhere, and watch little bespoke animations when you reach a certain part of a level and an enemy, like a couple of enemies are sitting there like having a picnic with each other or whatever. And it's like, that is where I think Asobi feels like, to me, that's where their identity is. That's where their personality is. It's in that sense of whimsy and in that attention to detail where any given area of any given level feels polished and also feels distinct from the other areas.
Let me read a counterpoint from our good friend, the server Scruffy.
I'm already beaten.
We will link Scruffy's full review of Astro Bot in the description because it's very good. And you should go check it out as I think a good general counterpoint to our whole conversation. But Scruffy sort of distilled down their thoughts to this one comment here that responds to what you're saying here, and says, I really enjoyed aspects of the game, but I feel like the over-reliance on cameos, which you sort of already addressed, and generic other elements make for a game that, while fun and really inventive, didn't leave a huge mark on me as a memorable title.
Okay, sure.
I'm going to skip down here a little bit, where Scruffy continues saying, I also felt that some of the powers went criminally underutilized, like the mouse.
Sure.
And I think this is an important point to draw in here, because as you're talking about your interpretation of the game being very similar to mine, it raises this larger point about the fact that Astro Bot is not a cohesive game by any real metric. In
the style of Mario 64, of Mario 3, of these old school stuff where it's like, you're just in a place, it's just stuff.
Well, I'd argue it's not even those, because there is a hub world. It's not particularly good. It's actually quite unmoored from any real sense of reality. There's like I don't think the hub world is very good, which we can talk about separately, but there's no sense of place cultivated. Even the world maps in Mario 3 at least provide a sense of like overarching narrative.
Then you click on the box and you're in your fucking pipeland.
Right. This is closest to Super Mario Galaxy in structure.
Definitely. Or 3D World or something.
Um, but to me, that's not really an issue.
No,
However, I
I
think
think it is,
Scruffy
yeah.
raises an interesting point about the potential underutilization of some
Okay.
ideas.
Yeah, sure.
In that we know from interviews, and there's a very good interview. I think it was Andy Robinson, but it was definitely VGC did with Team Asobi.
Yeah.
But how they're making
Nicholas Doucette, he's just out there. I have
Yeah.
seen like 9 interviews with this guy, and to his credit, he's doing them with every outlet, with every YouTube
Yeah.
channel. I watched the Golden Bolt. I watched the Kind of Funnies. I read VGC's. There's an IGN one. They all cover similar ground though.
Yeah.
So you can go like pick like 2 or 3 and you'll get the gist. But I really love, just as a tangent, one of my favorite marketing beats of this game is the fact that they have gotten into the nitty gritty of development history,
Yes.
of the development culture at Team Asobi, idea generation, which is where this comes in. This personality of the dev team of Team Asobi allows for constant idea generation, which is what Scruffy is complaining about. But I think you and I would agree on is a strength of this game.
It is. Essentially, what they talked about is that they were iterating on ideas, some of which were just tech demos for the DualSense, external to the game. That they were working on like a 2-week cycle, and then everybody comes together, everybody gives their feedback, no matter what department of the game you're in. You come in, you give your thoughts and ideas.
Reminds me of Mario Wonder, actually.
Well, that's actually what I was going to say.
I'm too excited. I know too much.
Yeah, I mean, the way they made Mario Wonder, and they talked about this in one of the fucking rare moments of Nintendo, speaking openly these days, that they had many more level ideas for Wonder than what made it into the game. And that's the same for Astro Bot. And to me, that's a successful formula. In that I just want, when I'm playing a platformer, I just want to be sort of surprised. Now, I love a very cohesive platformer. I love Super Mario Sunshine, but a more recent example is Kirby and the Forgotten Land.
Oh, totally.
That has majorly cohesive levels, a really great hub area, a really great overworld map, and then levels that are all in the same world theme until you complete that world and you move on to the next. I think that they're just simply different approaches. Totally. And it depends on what you get immersed by, or I guess a better word would be engaged by, because I wouldn't say this is a particularly immersive type of game. In the way that we use it as like a buzzword or whatever. For me, I just want to have constantly new things to do and interact with. And the success of Astro Bot is the fact that I think basically all of these new things, when I say things, I'm mostly referring to power-ups, are almost all in the same level of quality.
Definitely.
One of my big problems with Super Mario Odyssey, particularly in hindsight, is that I think that there is a pretty big variance in fun between the captures. They're saying, let's take this one mechanic and stretch it as far as we can, which is a very Nintendo approach to design. But I think that in the implementation, particularly in hindsight, is that sometimes you're in the Sherm tank and it's a more involved relationship you have to a boss fight or to a level where you get the funny little birds, the nose that you can flick yourself around in, which are really fun. But then sometimes you get kind of a boring one. You get a T-Rex, which is neat, but then you're out of the T-Rex in like 20 seconds, right? This game is saying we're going to have a disparate amount of ideas that, like Odyssey, are all simple in that they're one button. But we're going to really think about how these can interface with the levels. We're going to really think about how these can provide their own sense of fun. And we're only going to use them as long as we feel we can. The mouse one is an interesting example, because I think the mouse level is one of the greatest 3D platformer levels I've ever gotten to play.
I would agree.
But I think where Scruffy sees underutilization, I almost see them saying, look, this is a great idea. This is what we have to do with it right now. And we're going to call that good. And we're not going to then have a game that's less interesting from this point. We're going to have a game that is simply presenting you with other equally good ideas, like the Time Stopper VR goggles, which I think are the best power-up in the game.
Well, it's also like a little time stop guy. He's got a little face. I totally agree. And I think that what makes this game work for me is that it is variety, but it does not sacrifice polish to have variety. There are many games where I feel, and I don't share the exact same criticism of Odyssey that you do, though I certainly understand it, and I certainly understand in comparison to this game, because there is much more. There's a smaller gap between like utilization and quality and things here. But there are many games where I am looking for variety, and then they'll provide it, but then it'll be like, oh, well, this section is just less fun. The other ones, it received less polish. This mechanic was clearly not iterated on. It feels at odds against the other things. But what
Super Mario Sunshine?
Sunshine is a great example of that.
It's really great game.
Though I would also levy similar complaints about like small use power ups in games, even like Super Mario Galaxy and things like
100%.
that. But where I think this game succeeds is that there isn't any moment of this game where I felt like something in Sunshine where, oh, this is worse than the other
Yeah.
parts. It's always just as fun, and I think that for me, they strike a really good balance of returning to things.
Yeah.
There are some power ups that are never used again. I think the mouse is only used once, but most of the power ups are used, especially if you do everything as I did in
Yeah.
platinum this game, are used in a main level, in a boss level, in a side level, and in a challenge level or something. Most of the challenge levels, I think there are some challenge levels that have power ups, but not many, not most of them. And I think that like I never felt like, except for
Yeah.
maybe the mouse one, because I enjoyed that one so much, and I would agree that level is maybe the highlight of the entire game for me. That they felt like they were quickly forgotten.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, you get the frog gloves, cool mushroom level, you're swinging around. Oh, then the octopus boss at the end of that, and that comes back, 2 worlds later, and you're using it for something else. Um, I think the power up variety is the strongest mechanical and visually identifiable
Yeah.
element of the game Astro Bot, because there were moments of power ups in previous games. I remember in Playroom getting the monkey power up where you have to use the like
And it's back in this game.
half press down of the triggers of the DualSense to climb up this wall. It is back in this game and it's much better in this game. But power ups were something that Astrobot was largely unconcerned with in
Yeah.
previous games. But this game, most of the levels have a power up, and most of the levels center around that power up, which is actually something that I really do enjoy in terms of level design variety and physics variety and things. I can find it pretty underwhelming in even great games like 2D Mario games or like Kirby games where you get a really cool power up and
Yeah.
it isn't designed for that level. It's just an optional thing if you kind of want it. And then you're just like walking through this level and you've got something really cool on. You got the Tanuki suit or whatever. And it's like, well, it's like the level is not supposed, you're not supposed to
Yeah.
have it. You can have it. You cannot have it. But I like the fact that once you get a power up here, you're locked into having that power up until you finish the level. And that means that the level design and the way they hide secrets is varied across all the different worlds and all the different levels. When you get the balloon power up versus the frog power up versus the dog power up versus the chicken power up, you have to think differently about, well, now I need to think vertically because I have the chicken power up. And the way they can hide secrets is more about putting things on top of things instead of you have the frog power ups, you're like maybe pulling on things
Yeah.
to reveal them. It completely changes the way that Astro moves and controls because his moveset is godfuck simple. He has a jump, he has a punch, and he's a charge punch and
Yeah.
a laser jump. But other than those two buttons, the square and X, or cross, uh, then having the charge versions of both of them,
Yeah.
whether it's that's hovering or spin attack. I like the fact that the combat and the traversal becomes completely flipped on its head when you get any given power up. I think that's really, really
It's
special.
needed,
Yeah.
really. Because again, you look at a game like Odyssey.
Yep.
What's interesting is Odyssey is such a sandbox,
Hmm.
more so than the other exploration style Mario's.
Yeah.
In Parks, they said, "Look, we're just going to design extremely strong, I think still unmatched,
Yeah.
probably never to be matched movement mechanics for Mario,
Hmm.
and we're just going to build different playgrounds
Definitely.
to stretch those in."
Yeah.
Um, Astro, you can't really do that with
No.
necessarily because the movement's just not as good.
No.
It's serviceable,
Yeah,
and
it's
I
good.
don't mean
It's
that as a
fine.
criticism.
Yeah.
It's simply it services your need to jump between obstacles,
Yes.
literally,
Yes.
right? And so by introducing these power ups, it allows Asobi, I think, to stretch their level design muscles
Yeah.
better.
Absolutely.
And it's
Yeah.
again why I like it. I like a well curated game like this.
Sure.
The secrets, the level
Mm.
design, the power ups, all very curated.
Definitely.
This is
Yeah.
not really a game about thinking for yourself,
Mhm.
and I don't mean that as a criticism. You're kind of put into the mode of how you should be looking for secrets.
Yeah.
You are
Yeah.
when a problem in the level introduces itself, a wall you have to break, an
Mhm.
obstacle you have to get over, an enemy you have to kill. The solution is always going to be the power up on your back.
Yes. Absolutely.
I don't think that that's a problem.
No.
I think that that's just a particular approach to
It's
platformer
focused
design.
design.
It's the antithesis of the more expressive platformers that we see from Nintendo in Odyssey, but then especially in the indie space with particularly fast platformers like a Lunistis or like a Demon Turf or whatever. This is saying, no, we're actually going to pare back your options and we're really going to funnel you through a particular experience. There are secrets, there are hidden exits, but Mario Wonder had secrets and hidden exits. They are along a core path. It's not like Super Mario World or anything.
Definitely.
And I think that that's fine. I think that's a good way to design. I think you just have to enter Astro Bot knowing that it is a very linear game.
Totally.
And I like linearity.
Yeah, no. And I think what is so cool about Astro Bot is I think it meets in the middle on a side that I prefer. The exploratory sandbox, more spectacle nature of something like Super Mario Odyssey or Rift Apart or It Takes Two or Psychonauts 2, all these more recent 3D platforms that I think are some of the top of the genre, versus games that I still like a lot, but I think feel more too streamlined to a detrimental effect to me. Games like Mario 3D World, which is a great game. I love that game, but a lot of the levels are just things floating in space, and they have no sense of cohesion. What I think is nice about Astro Bot is that because it is kind of locked into this, you have to do this puzzle, you have to do this section. There's no, I can find this funny little way up to skip it if I want to. I think it leads to a sense of spectacle and of place that many 3D platformers have a hard time matching. I actually do think that It Takes Two is another game that matches this very well. But in any given Astro Bot level, you are introduced to a world that tells a little bit of a story that you progress through, and then there's a little fun thing in the middle that twists things up a little bit, and then it culminates in a spectacle set piece of some kind where something's attacking you and you're trying to defend yourself or whatever. And that sort of within any given level ramping up, I think is masterful. There is no just like, well, there is sometimes, but most of the time it's not you get to the end and touch the flagpole, touch the little you won sign platform. There is something that leads you to that and makes that moment when Astrobot finally flies to the air and does a little flip and then lands down and then the confetti goes everywhere. It makes it a joyous crescendo moment because they didn't give you the option, which again, I think this is smart, to go around the back and futz your way up and then find your way onto it, which is great in other games. But I like that Astrobot allows for the sense of what I get out of other PlayStation games. A game like Uncharted isn't great because it's not linear. It's great because it is linear, and they force you to shimmy along the falling boat as Nate is swinging in and the fireworks are like going over you. Astrobot has that sense of curated spectacle that makes some of the most memorable moments in God of War Ragnarok, in Uncharted 4. Astrobot follows along that, which I think is really, really special.
Yeah, I agree with you in the course of an individual level.
Sure.
I don't think that this game does a good job really selling me on the idea that any of these are real places.
Oh, sure. Yeah, fair enough.
And I think even Galaxy does this much better. Like you go to the Honey Hive Galaxy and you have the Queen and there's a sense that there's stuff going on here. You go to the Beach Ball Galaxy and the penguins are swinging around, they're swimming down in the water or whatever. That's not here.
Yeah.
The levels in Astrobot just have things that you interact with.
Sure.
There's not much set dressing to them. And so I totally agree with you in the sense that they curate really good set piece moments, particularly in the boss battles, which I think are all fantastic. I know I get your point about them being reused, but I just think
it's just the visual design. It's not the mechanical design.
I mean, Tropical Freeze to me is always going to be maybe the best platformer ever. And for me, part of that is because you go to the Fruity Factory and you see the little minions working, right? And there's a sense that even these totally unbelievable places have a believable sense to them for the creatures that are there at the time.
Yeah, wait, what do you mean? The jelly factories in the jungle exist? Unbelievable? What do you mean? That's how jelly's made. Oh, what the fuck? Continue.
And I think that is one of the reasons why Astro doesn't yet feel like its world is totally alive.
Okay, yeah, totally fair. Yeah.
And that's where I think I'd meet you halfway on your point about the visual design of the
We don't
game.
have to touch, but we're meeting halfway.
That's fair. That's fair enough. I wish that there was a little bit more to that extent.
Yeah.
The levels are very 3D world.
Mm-hmm.
They are just obstacle courses.
Sure.
Now they might have more obviously complicated geometry, more things to fuck around with, more set pieces. They don't feel as flat as the levels in the 3D world.
Yeah.
But they don't feel like they are part of something larger.
No, of course. Yeah.
And I wish that was the case. Like, I'm not crazy about the fact that you're going to like constellations of animals, and then it's just like completely separate levels that all exist in like these like concentric circles. Again, when I'm in the level, I don't care, and this is still a 5-star game for me. But part of me in our discussion is just thinking about, well, okay, what's next for Astro? And I just simply don't think it can be the PlayStation thing. So it leads me to wonder, okay, well, if I had to take a perfect, from what I feel is a perfect game for my priorities as a player, to a more universally exciting game, I think the solution is to marry what you're talking about their ability to curate these spectacle moments and levels, and stitch them into something that's bigger than that.
Sure. Yeah. What's interesting about all of these things that we're talking about in this recent part of the conversation, the linearity, the spectacle, the curation, the attention to detail, and then for you, what you're looking for out of a individual world feeling more like a cohesive place. I actually do think that the VIP levels at the end of any given world are the best example of what you're talking about. When you're in the Uncharted level, there is full set dressing around, and there are trees towering around you, and you're going across a couple of turtles to land on a boat to then slide over to a tree and do a little puzzle. And of course, that's because they're basing this world off of a game that is all about its set dressing. You're immersed in an Uncharted world, and the level is meant to mimic reality. But I think any one of, except for maybe at Ape Escape, intentionally so, but any one of those other levels feel very internally cohesive and much more progression focused, much more environmentally cohesive than, you just insert any of the other, like, random haunted house level or whatever. They've got plenty of just like kind of just level themes. And I think that shows that they do have the ability to do that. They just aren't largely concerned with it because it isn't really about the level as a whole, even though I do appreciate the attention they put into there. It is we want to make sure, to my point earlier about attention to detail, that any little thing that you're doing, even if it might seem completely superfluous, is fun and has a sense of whimsy and kineticism and personality, and electric buzz, as I was mentioning earlier, which I think is one of the big strengths of this game.
Yeah, I mean, and that's part of why any point I might raise about what I'd want to see them do in the future. In the case of this game is largely moot because it just feels good to play. Like, I am, and we've had many discussions this channel to this extent, I don't give a fuck about the story. I would like as little story in my games as possible.
Here's one.
I'm playing Star Wars Outlaws right now, and I literally can't follow the story just because I can't perceive a game story. I just don't give a fuck. Unless it's like unless you're Naughty Dog or CD Projekt Red or whatever, just take the story out of the game. But this sort of environmental storytelling is interesting to me, so I'd like to see them do more of it. However, when you're just speaking to a player like me and saying, and you mentioned this earlier, let's just put things in the level that are simply fun. A big pile of acorns that spills out of a tree, or like a shit ton of little like Orbeez or balls to just punch around or whatever. I think that stuff's really great. The feel of the different terrain in the controller, like, so much effort on Asobi's part, them being so intimately familiar with this hardware, them advising other PlayStation studios on how this hardware can be used, leads to them saying, let's just make a game that is a fun sensory experience. And I think that is in and of itself a unique sense of cohesion that I don't think many other games offer. Like, I was reflecting to myself because as you're playing, your DualSense speaker is almost always in conversation with your TV speakers. You're almost always feeling the terrain Astro is on. And I think that this is something that would elevate a Last of Us Part 3 to a significant degree. And so
and I think it's very possible that they lean into that.
And I think that the technical side of this game, I don't care about the frame rate. If this game crashed on me every 45 minutes, it probably wouldn't change my experience at all.
Same here.
I almost made a joking tweet, but I was like, there's a twinge of seriousness to it, which
Mhm.
you can again think less of me for this.
I
But the
already
only
do.
thing that would
Already do.
make
You haven't even said it.
the only thing that make Astro Bot look better to me is if it was like in 480i on a
Oh, yeah,
CRT
yeah,
TV.
yeah.
But like the technical stuff that matters to me,
You just want it to be a GameCube game.
I would love if this was a GameCube game. I'd love it even more than I do right now. But
Not a lot of Orbeez gonna be in that GameCube game.
but to me, it's
You know,
like
you could. You don't even have a TV that would
yeah.
be capable of that. You could just plug the PS5. You could plug it into an old
You
TV.
can do that,
Yeah.
and sometimes people do that, but that's a little too attention seeking for
Yeah.
me. That's a little
Well,
too
you said
much.
that's what you want.
Well, I want the game to be built to do that,
Okay,
you
fair
know. And
enough.
I'm not going to go on Twitter. I'm not fucking Jordan Starkweather
Yeah.
with this with
God forbid.
CRTs every time I sneeze at my
Yeah.
nose or whatever. But I don't. I like technical innovation, but I don't care about that kind of technical
Yeah, sure.
information. I care about man. I can run Astro's hand along a wall
Mm.
and get feedback in the controller when I have
Yeah.
to push it in, and it has me thinking like we're gonna play Indiana Jones this this holiday.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be so great if that Xbox controller had the technology
Yeah,
of a
it has basically
DualSense?
nothing.
So we could have this kind of feedback
Yeah.
because I feel like through touch and through sound cues,
Yeah.
Asobi is finding new ways to merge technical progress with
Yeah.
gameplay
Yeah,
ideas.
because they're doing things with sound and
Yeah.
haptics and the feedback triggers and things and the microphone on the speaker that I haven't seen done in a game before. And really,
Yeah.
it is only in the more tech demo games, which to your point, they obviously have a history in that leads to this doing something that I haven't seen done in other games, even to other PlayStation exclusive games that I
Yeah.
think are excellent. There is some moments of interesting trigger tension in the Spider-Man games or sounds coming out of the controller or slight vibrations in Ratchet and Clank, but Asobi turns that up to 14.
Yeah.
And it certainly makes the game feel different, like literally feel different,
Yeah.
because you take a look at where this kind of HD Rumble sort of stuff started, kind of. I think about certain moments in Super Mario Odyssey where HD Rumble in the
Yeah.
Joy-Con are used to a somewhat similar but significantly more basic effect. This does feel like the natural progression of that, and it'll be interesting to see. I think there's a likelihood that that the next Mario game or whatever is closer to Astro Bot than Odyssey is.
Sure.
But where Asobi then I think can offer this kind of technical advice to other studios to do what you're saying. One of the things that people praise most about one of the most praised games on PS5 is Returnal, and the way that that uses haptic feedback and uses this. Everyone always says the sense of rain on the controller or whatever. You can feel it in your hands. Astro Bot is the leading example of that. Which is cool that there still is stuff to be done with this hardware, but it really only seems like this studio, frankly, like knows that the controller is capable of that.
Well, let's think about Asobi at a little bit of a higher level.
Sure.
I'm really interested by the whole conversation around Asobi.
Yeah.
Because I think that people don't really know what they want or
Sure.
what they're asking for. Because there's a lot of discussion online about how this game evokes, like, for lack of a more precise word, like a sense of sadness over the fact that Asobi is using characters and aesthetics of franchises that are no longer around.
Yeah.
My interpretation of this is that Asobi is closing the door on this stuff, which is also why I would be a lot more critical of another Astro Bot game in this PlayStation tradition than I am of this one, having not played it. I think that Asobi is trying to say, we care about this stuff.
Sure.
We're going to present it in a way that's meaningful. I'm sure that there was no top-down mandate to include a Loco Roco level.
Yeah. That was definitely their idea.
The way where I would imagine that there was some pressure to have God of War and Horizon be very prominently featured.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're presenting them this design doc, they're like, okay, well, you're going to have Uncharted, God of War, and Horizon, right?
Right. I think that it is a good talking point online to get worried about this. But I think that at a certain point,
to get worried about what?
To get worried about this idea that Asobi is like trading on history and characters that aren't theirs.
Yeah.
But I just think that it's silly because you have to play it out to its conclusion, in my
Yeah.
opinion. So you want Team Asobi to do what? You want them to make a new Ape Escape game?
Hmm.
You want them to make a new Parappa game?
Hmm.
Is this the idea?
Hmm.
Or is the idea that success that this game is seemingly not finding, but let's say this game sold 10 million
Yeah.
copies right away.
God forbid.
What were you hoping? That they were going to go, hey, Insomniac, stop making Ghost of Tsushima 2. You're going back to make Sly Cooper 5,
Well, guess
right?
what? That's Sucker Punch. That'd be even weirder.
Sorry, I misspoke. I just think that you have to look at Asobi for what they are, which is a team that are at minimum on the level of quality of the internal teams of Japan studio, on the level or higher than what Sucker Punch was at, what Insomniac was at, what Naughty Dog was at when they were making all their platformers, and realize that Asobi is filling the void you think that this game is exposing.
Yeah.
Astro Bot is the answer to these franchises you think are gone. It's right here.
Yeah.
And so, even more than another Astro game, which they tease at in the message when you get the Platinum Trophy, I'd love them to just say, fuck it, we're making a new big colorful IP.
Yeah. God, I hope so.
And using Astro Bot as what I see it as on a macro level, which is closing one door and opening another door. And that other door is Asobi, who are as talented as his other teams.
Yeah. And I think this game, in what it signals the confidence from PlayStation that they have built up this repertoire, they've built up this talent, and now this game is their premier game in the sense of really focusing on this as one of the big pillars of their year. Sales wise, I don't know if it necessarily will become that, but I agree with you in basically everything you said. I think that for me, it comes down to a sense of cynicism that many people have about the current state of the games industry that they are then projecting, I think, unfairly onto Team Asobi, who, by all measures and by everything we know, are incredibly talented. I don't think anyone's denying that, but they're incredibly respectful of their peers. They inherently have this sense of reverence for history. And I think the thing that people know, but I don't think they really carried this forward in when they discuss about this, is Team Asobi is Japan Studio. They were a part of Japan Studio for a lot of their history. And the fact that they stuck around is an indictment on PlayStation closing the rest of the studio, but nothing on them. If Japan Studio still existed and let's just say Team Asobi was called Japan Studio because it is made up of almost entirely Japan Studio team members, because the team started there, and then when they closed the larger studio, a lot of those team members went to Asobi. If Asobi was simply called Japan Studio and made this exact same game, nothing to be said about if they had made an Ape Escape game in the last 3 years or whatever. I think no one would care. I think it is simply the name change that is like, oh, well, that's not actually Japan Studio. They are.
Well, let's be fair. It isn't Japan Studio. I mean, 65 people at Team Asobi is a fraction of what Japan Studio was.
True, yes, but what I think people also don't understand about what Japan Studio was is it was mostly a production house for external teams. Games like Bloodborne, games like Team Eco working on the Fumio Ueda trilogy, Clap Hands making the Everybody's Golf series. Most of their IP were made by teams that they were then
100%.
helped by Japan Studio. And so the reason why I bring this up for Team Asobi is that when they reference Ape Escape, when they reference Locorogo, it's because people who worked on those games still work at Team Asobi. And they are making these references because they've been there for 20 years, even if it was through another name in the decades past. But that legacy still, I think, holds true to me feeling like all these references are incredibly genuine. And so when they decide that the first level of our game is going to be, or the first major level of the game is going to be the Ape Escape thing, it's like, okay, well, there's more than likely someone there who was around working on the Ape Escape IP back in the day and loves this, and Nicholas Doucette was a big fan of that and grew up in that era and carries us forward.
Yeah.
To me, it is a genuine sense of reverence, and especially to the level of the VIP bots, which I want to get into in a little bit. The amount of detail in the references of each of these things shows to me that this is not a cynical thing that is like, kicking dirt over that or like burying them in the litter box. It is, we love this guy. Well, let's just say Patapon. There's not going to be another Patapon game. We love Patapon.
It's a show.
Yeah, that's a good point. So maybe there will be. Who knows? Continuing with Patapon, there's not going to be another Patapon game. There's not going to be another Devil Dice. There's not going to be another Intelligent Cube, whatever. We want to show that the people that
Yeah.
we care about these things and that these things existed, and we're going to put all of our heart into making this little reference from the thing you get in the gotcha machine to the design of the bot to the little animation to the little tagline and the name. This is going to be as much care as we can put into this because it is simply not realistic to bring back Gravity Rush and Shadow of the Colossus and Loco and Patapon and Parappa the Rapper. That's not how game development works.
Yeah, and like I'm not disagreeing with you in large part.
Sure.
I think it's more that they can never fill the void that Japan Studio filled.
Absolutely true. Yeah.
But it's also true that what people are asking for is not solely what Japan Studio is responsible for. What I mean to say is people aren't lamenting the fact that Japan Studio is gone because of games like Bloodborne.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Really, this is a discourse that is being driven by people who would now probably most closely identify as Nintendo fans if they had to pick an ecosystem they like the most. I just think that it's impossible to, as you're saying, recreate that environment. And the culture of PlayStation is just simply different.
Mm-hmm.
So I think my opinion on a realistic level is you can either accept that Japan Studio is gone and that culture of Sony Computer Entertainment is gone, and now we have Asobi to fill platforming void that people are really speaking about when they speak about the loss of Japan Studio. Or you can look at this as being a soulless title. Now, I totally appreciate and agree with what you're saying about the fact that it feels like there's reverence. I don't even really care if there's reverence or not. Like, at this point, Smash Bros. Is made by people at Bandai Namco who, by and large, have no affiliation with any of the shit they're covering.
Totally.
You don't need to have that.
Absolutely, yeah.
What you need to have, whether you have personal reverence or not, I don't care. What you need is you need to have an end product that feels as though it's not insulting the intelligence of your fan.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure.
And I don't think that this game does.
No.
Because they're literally saying either you get this or you don't. And if you don't get it, just enjoy that we made a great game.
Yeah.
And so what I would hope to see, although, again, as I said on Twitter, I don't begrudge anybody for their cynicism towards Astro Bot, because Sony did, for no great reason, totally ruin the culture of Sony Computer Entertainment and replace it with something that we're seeing fail in real time.
Yeah.
So I understand and wouldn't tell somebody that they're wrong for feeling this way necessarily, because I understand the context. But I think that it's not particularly useful to look at Asobi separate from this game as anything other than what I think they clearly are, which is doing their best to be what you want out of PlayStation.
Absolutely. Again. Yeah. And that is what I think is so special about Astro Bot, is that it is not the first 3D platformer on PS5. It's not the first family-friendly game on PS5. But I think people feel like it is because it does feel like something new.
Yeah.
When you look at Rift Apart, which I think many people would agree is a very high quality game and does speak to some of the, like, this is one of the longest running IP and it is family friendly, or Sackboy Big Adventure or Destruction All Stars, or even now Lego Horizon Adventures coming out soon. It's not like there are none of these games, but Astro Bot, I think, because it comes from the Japan Studio roots, because Astro Bot is a newer IP and not Horizon, which is now on its 4th game in 3 years or whatever, and not a Ratchet and Clank, which is its 25th game or whatever. I think Astro Bot gets this spark of, oh, this is something very fresh. And that is certainly what sets it apart, and why I love it so much is because in conversation with other, especially in-house developed Sony games, we don't get a lot of games like this anymore. And I think that this, to me, signals that because Sony was willing to give them a full console release, propping it up in their showcases, selling it on store shelves game, that they know that there still is a place and that they could potentially work back Asobi back, and maybe other teams are working with other teams to having a place of that kind of culture where you can generate colorful, new, friendly IP. And I think that my very, I think maybe overly optimistic, but I think potentially realistic view of the future of Team Asobi is that they begin to expand, and as Nicholas Doucette said in a couple of interviews, is they expand not to make any given project bigger, higher fidelity in
Right.
itself, but to make more of these kind of projects. And I think that there's even if this is not a smash hit, I think the goodwill that is generated, the amazing reviews that is generated, you're not closing the studio, even if the game
Absolutely
doesn't
not.
sell 5 million copies. I think if any, bare minimum, you let them continue, make their own
Yeah.
project, a sequel to this or a new IP, whatever. That's a great track record. But I think there is even still the possibility of bring another 20 people on board,
Yeah.
make a 50-person game and a 25-person game that comes out in 2 years, and we get another jolt of new IP, family friendly, colorful, fun energy that we're not going to ask Sucker Punch to do. We're not going to ask a Naughty Dog to do, or Santa Monica to do, because they make something that is the core of what their current identity is, and it would be
Yeah.
even, frankly, it'd be even more detrimental to the progress that they've built to cut down Santa Monica and tell them to do something that they're
Make
not good
Connecticut
at anymore.
too.
Yippee! But I'm very hopeful of what Astrobot signifies, because
Yeah.
I think there is space for this, and I think Astrobot's especially critical success. And I think, well, I read confidence out of Sony in this game, not because it had a particularly long marketing cycle, but
Yeah.
because they're letting the team just speak about this. They're letting them share what their ideas are, and get a glimpse into what their culture is. And that's a kind of transparency that I think communicates confidence. And I think everything
Yeah.
about this game communicates confidence, from its fidelity and its polish, and the way the team is working on it, and the fact that they got all these companies on board. I mean, this is maybe the biggest collaboration of third party
Yeah.
IP in the history of the medium, and that's a core of confidence and creativity that I think that now exists within, and has existed, but is now more obvious within PlayStation Studios.
It's tricky because like I don't have any confidence in PlayStation.
Yeah.
And I don't really think they had confidence in this game, or else they would have positioned it differently. I think it's more that they gave them creative freedom. I think there's a difference between giving them support and giving them creative freedom. I think that everything I've ever heard anybody from Asobi say is awesome.
Yeah, totally.
Even your point about them scaling up, they even in this VGC interview, they say, hey, well, we're going to be really careful about people we hire.
Yeah.
And we have a very rigorous standard for bringing new people on board. And so Astrobot doesn't need to sell 5 million copies. I'm pulling a number out of my ass, but if this game costs $50 million to make, you would have to sell 800,000 units to break even.
And it's definitely going to sell that.
Yeah, and so like I think that Asobi will always be fine.
Yeah.
As long as they keep working shrewdly as they are. It would just be nice to like, I just think it was stupid that PlayStation announced this and then put it out 2 months later.
Yeah.
And we've been saying that like, oh, you know, they put Concord before Astrobot. But I think that there's, you know, they didn't buy Concord thinking it was going to fail.
Yeah.
You know, there's an argument that they put Astrobot next to Concord.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And so they want to put the Lego spinoff of Horizon in the holiday slot, not this. I just think that part of the challenge of talking about Astrobot is I think that we grapple onto the game in a way that it maybe doesn't deserve, not for its own quality, but for what it represents in a larger sense.
For that, no game is the heart of the industry,
100%.
is the sole reason why anything is happening on any production level, whatever.
Or should even be the direction for PlayStation Studios. I don't think that any team that PlayStation Studios currently owns should make a game like this. I don't think a single one should. And I think that Naughty Dog...
Not even Asobi?
I think that Naughty Dog should never make a game that's anywhere close to this ever. And I don't think Santa Monica should. And I don't think that Guerrilla should. I think that Astro...
Well, Guerrilla is. They're co-developing Lego Horizon.
Are they?
Yeah, it's them and Studio Go working together.
I'd be curious to
know. In the way that like aiding in EPD. I mean...
So I'd be curious to know what they're actually doing.
Yeah.
But my larger point is that Astrobot's not the center of the PlayStation universe. It shouldn't be the center of the PlayStation universe. But I think PlayStation should give it more attention than it got.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of the discourse that we're even talking about is PlayStation's fault. With how they marketed the game. And again, I think they had to do it. They had to. They definitely said like, look, Astrobot's not a really big IP. There are these various factors working against it. We have to lean into this PlayStation stuff. We have to do this. We have to put Asobi out there.
Yeah.
Like it's not. I think that it's as likely that Sony said, "You're free to go do interviews." As I said, this game needs as much press as we can get it. So
Yeah,
you
yeah.
need to go out and you need to speak to everybody.
Yeah.
Right.
They flew in scores of people to come to actual Asobi headquarters.
Yeah, and so it just I look at all these factors and I'm like, what does PlayStation think about this game?
Yeah.
And are they happy with it selling 750,000 units?
Mhm.
No, I'm not saying that they're going to get rid of Asobi, but
Yeah.
are they really going to prioritize their games ever if that's the scale title they make?
Sure.
Do they just, it's a different leadership.
Definitely. And that's what we're really going to have to see.
Yeah.
How the success and failure of any of the given games of the last 2 or 3 years,
Yeah.
how that changes and the release calendar and all these things shift. Game development takes so long that we will not feel the ramifications of Astro Bot's success slash failure, Concord success slash failure, the dry schedule of the last couple of years. We're not going to feel any of this change for 3 years, 4 years at the minimum. And Herman Hulst and Hideaki Nishino being now the co-CEOs and all these things. This is going to take time to build up, but momentum is happening.
Yeah.
And the failure of Concord and the hopeful success of Astro Bot and Lego Horizon coming out, these are all they're all part of this like waving flag in the wind, and I'm really interested to see how, especially for Asobi in particular, this game's particularly critical success pushes PlayStation to, I think, hopefully give them more support or see what they do next. Because while you say that Astrobot the game, Astro the character, Asobi the team isn't the heart of PlayStation, I do think that there is a world in recapturing the younger audience, in building up new generations of PlayStation fans, that hopefully Team Asobi and Astrobot and these family-friendly games can work to expand the identity of PlayStation in the way that it has contracted over the last couple of years. And I'm hopeful that, I mean, I would enjoy another Astrobot platformer, but I would be much more interested in seeing what Asobi could do with another genre of game or a new IP. And I think that an Astro Kart crossover game would be awesome.
Yeah.
And I think that would service a really interesting niche because they haven't had a kart. Sony hasn't published a kart game or more family friendly, like arcadey racing game in 2 decades or whatever. And so I think the world is their oyster right now. They made a game that people love, and they are working on a scale that makes them like they're just not that important on a financial level to Sony because every other team is currently like giving them the funds to do whatever they want. And I think we'll see some really cool projects out of it.
And there's a couple. I want to continue down this thread just a little bit longer. Then we'll go back into a couple specific things.
That sounded like a finishing statement. No, but it's not.
Yeah,
it's not.
It's weird because we don't know who wanted this game to be made.
Well, from what I know from the interviews with Nicholas Doucette of the production history of this game, it is Playroom is wrapping up. They've been working with the PS5 hardware for years at that point, and they make this game's design doc and pitch it to PlayStation 3.5 years ago. And I think the coolest part with the idea that's going to include all these characters, with the fact that it's going to be 10 to 12 hours long, and September 2024 on that design doc 3.5 years ago. So from what I know, I can make a pretty confident wager that it was Nicholas Doucette, whatever higher up group at Team Asobi that pitched this to PlayStation.
But but that's not quite my point. Okay, what I mean to say is, this is a Jim Ryan era PlayStation game.
Yeah.
There's no real saying that the new PlayStation leadership sees value in this.
That's true. Yeah.
There's also a good argument to be made for the fact that in an ideal world, if Concord was more successful, that would be a game that'd be most interesting to like 13 to 17-year-olds, right? Like, I think you can look at some of these games and say, actually, the momentum to get younger players in isn't just Astro Bot. It's maybe other games like Concord and Lego Horizon, which is coming down and everything. And it's possible.
Or even Helldivers.
Helldivers.
That's definitely something you can see. Like, if we were in like middle school, that'd be the coolest fucking thing 100%. You've ever seen in your life.
I just don't think it's impossible that at the same time that Jim Ryan was making a song and dance out of these live service games, which in fact are going to intrinsically appeal to a younger audience playing Fortnite more than a older disposable income PS5 Pro, let's play big cinematic single player games audience. that's what he wanted.
Yeah.
And underneath that big live service messaging was this push as well.
Sure.
And so
Yeah, definitely.
my larger point is that I'm just curious to see what, now that he's out, now that we have new people running PlayStation, what they really parse from the, let's call it, complicated success of Astro Bot.
Yeah.
And whether it squares with the direction of the company moving forward, and whether they continue to make games akin to what Sumo Digital is doing with like a Sackboy, to where we'll let them happen, but they'll be small games, and it'll just be what it is. I hope that that's not the case. I'm just really curious because I don't think that Astro Bot has put its best foot forward in terms of holistic success. It winning Game of the Year would be a big big feather in that cap,
which is very possible.
I don't really see what would beat it at this point. Do you? What do you think? That's just a sidebar. Do you think that it has that?
I agree, and I think it's because it's picked up an interesting momentum at the right time. And I think that what will be even more interesting to see is if something in the next 2-3 months can match level of critical success. Because I don't really see.
I think it's Assassin's Creed Shadows.
You think that can get like a 95 on?
Remember, that team's last Assassin's Creed game did get nominated for Game of the Year.
Valhalla did not get. No, not sure.
Which one got nominated for Game of the Year?
Odyssey.
Did they make Valhalla too?
Yeah, it was in between. But just being categorical.
Sure.
But I think that that you're right. One interesting thing about this current leadership, Sony culture, that I think Astro Bot could fit interestingly into, is that they want to create in-house newer IP that they can then proliferate. And I think Astro is interestingly ripe for that in terms of something like we've seen many more family-friendly, more child-focused IP become, is a grounds for little animated shorts that they can sell to Netflix, that they can sell to other things, just funny little Astros running around and doing things and animations that they can like place into other things. Astro, they could have a little Astro like showing up on Nickelodeon or whatever, and like waving at the bottom of the screen and saying like, watch whatever next time. I think Astro, in it not being just a guy, which is rare for PlayStation characters, I think Astro has the potential to fit into their drive for cross-media IP because he's just a funny old dude. Well, and so I think that could be a way that they keep it around, and then Asobi would continue working on that to keep that IP relevant on the game side, because that's ultimately what's most important. Because we know that they really do want to generate characters that people recognize, that they can just put in all sorts of little nooks and crannies.
He also has a synergy with the hardware that I don't really think any other mascot has.
No, has never had.
No, I mean he's a tech forward guy for a tech forward PlayStation. Same color scheme. He looks similarly sleek. I think Astro is a great mascot. It's just interesting to square that from your point of view with your feeling that Astro as a world is not strong enough.
World, yes. Character, no. Astro Bot, I love the little guy. He's funny. I love him waving. I love him doing his little animations. He's great. And I also love the fact that because of his simplicity, it's very easy to meld his design into other things to then diversify what little Astrobots can be. I think what's so cool about the VIP bots in this game is that, unlike the previous games, which were generic Astrobot, just white little Astrobot characters doing actions that were mimicking other IP, we now have a Astrobot that is Kratos with the red stripe down his face and a beard on his face. That was not what was in Playroom. And I think that that's to Astro's design benefit of he is very malleable in the way that Kirby is, in the way that you can just place him into all these different scenarios and stretch and bend him and make him into a balloon and make him into a sponge, which we never even mentioned, which I think might be my favorite power-up in the game. He has the simplicity of design and iconography of big blue eyes, little antenna on his head, that Kirby and Mario, I think, have been so successful at, and I really think that is what could be utilized going in the future. What I just hope to see, and where I levy my criticism against Astrobot as a series, as an IP, is that there aren't iconic level elements of Astro Bot.
Yeah.
There isn't the coin block. There isn't the mushroom that has this like very distinct energy to it. I think that the enemies across the board are very bland, and I have not only no interest in fighting them because I don't think their mechanics are largely
Yeah.
that interesting, but also that is where the most reutilization is we are seeing the exact same models and
Yeah.
animations of the little like porcupine guys like shoot the spike down after a couple seconds, or the goo guy who goes I've fought that guy in 2 other games,
Yeah.
and its mechanics and visual language hasn't changed at all. I think that they need to, for me, to be something that I fully love the world of. I think create frankly better designs. I have no interest in any of the little robot enemies that show up in Astro, and that's not to say that little robot enemies can't be cool, because I think Mega Man has a lot of really
Yeah.
iconic, funny little enemies. But the design language of the world of Astro that is specifically Astrobot, I don't think has I don't think has any juice to it.
See, I disagree because I really like the animals, and I'm surprised I didn't lean more into this.
Oh sure,
And
yeah, no, those are certainly better. Yeah,
I'm not just talking about
the power
the
ups.
power ups. I'm talking
Yeah,
about like
hey,
they're
there's a little bunny. There's a flamingo. Yeah,
and they always have great interactions, like the
totally. Yeah.
astro lemurs that are running around, or the monkeys that are in the
Mhm.
trees,
Yeah.
or I love the astro elephants.
Sure.
I think all
The
that stuff.
cow.
Yeah, the astro cow is
Yeah.
great. I mean, I think that these are strong.
Yeah. No, I think that those are a massive step up from the enemies. Absolutely.
Yeah, and so I just feel like
But also, like, you can't really use those for anything. Like, those aren't.
you can fill in a world with them.
You can, but like the things that are important to the world are the more specific enemies and things like.
Yeah.
This is like comparing like the little white bird that lands on your hat if you like rest too long in Cascade or in Cap
Yeah.
Kingdom to Cappy's design.
I'm not saying that the anime designs are good. I'm just
Yeah.
saying that I wouldn't agree that the art direction of the game is
Sure.
and the world is bad
Yeah.
on the whole.
Mhm.
And I really do like a lot of the theming. I think the game's use of color is fantastic.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think about that very first level you enter, which
Yeah.
is
Oh.
the green fields and these beautiful cherry blossom
Yep.
trees. I love the casino level.
Mhm.
I think that a lot of stuff like that is very successful.
Absolutely.
I think that it's close.
Yeah.
I would tend to agree that the enemies aren't great.
Yeah.
But I also think my biggest problem with Astrobot,
Mhm.
it's somewhat different now, but the one hit kill is just silly. I don't understand why they've done this.
Mhm.
Because you have to think about this. There's no stakes to the game. If
Yeah.
they put so many checkpoints in every
Yeah.
level that a death is just an inconvenience.
Yeah.
In
Of 30, 45 seconds.
but I think
Yeah.
that when you're in a level of 5 or 6 minutes,
Mm.
and the tempo of the level is so important,
Mhm.
breaking it
Yeah.
for these
Yeah.
random enemies is just a mistake.
Yeah.
I think.
Totally.
And I think they recognize that the one hit death is punishing, or else there wouldn't be checkpoints literally almost sometimes on each sides of an individual obstacle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I just don't understand why they've retained this.
Yeah.
I think that there's a world where an Astro just doesn't even have any enemies. Just drop the enemies.
Sure.
Make the levels more complicated.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah, I'd like that. Yeah,
give him two. Just give him two hits.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Like-
and have him like he's wearing a little helmet that like shatters, and that's like this
Yeah.
visual signifier that
just
he's
like crack
one hit.
crack his glass.
Yeah. Well, you can't see that while you're playing the game.
Yeah.
But I think you're
Yeah.
right, and that on a gameplay level I think it only makes sense in the challenge levels, which
Yeah.
are designed to you're going to test your platforming skills. You're going to know the timing of the different little abilities and the different level elements, whether it's just putting fire to bar or the way that the enemies interact. I think that those are the smartest use of traditional platforming in this
Sure.
game, in the way that these elements that you've gone through in a level, which is like the ice cracking as you like skate over it and then it like crumbles behind you, that is a kind of cool little tactile visual moment in an ice level in Astro, but you're not going to die on it. But then when they place that as a little floating disc that
Yeah.
you have to land on it and then jump to something else, and if you stay too long then you fall in a challenge level, it's like, oh, I can see where these level design elements become something that makes more sense on a strictly platforming level. But what I agree with you on the pacing and tempo of these levels, I like that they're easy. I like that this game is easy because it
Yeah.
is about the kineticism of the world and not necessarily Astro. I think what makes Mario fun is that Mario is fun to control, not necessarily that the level designs are
Yeah.
so fun to like interact with. Whereas Astro, I think Astro's, as you said, serviceable to control. His hover is fine, his punch is fine, but what I like is the way that his hover and his punch interact with elements in the level. When you punch a button, when you punch a
100%.
tree, when you fly over. I love the fact that you can float, use your little laser thing and like you cut logs and then they like realistically shatter into little pieces. Like that is what Astro is so good at, is those, as I was saying earlier, little design touches that are
Yeah.
totally superfluous but make the moment to moment interaction like leagues above what other platformers are doing.
I understand those challenge levels are in the game. I just don't. I think that they're sort of incongruent with the larger thing.
Mm.
They're fun enough to go through.
Yeah.
They are harder.
Yeah.
They're still not especially hard.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say at the maximum, I only died a half dozen times on the hardest one for me. But I don't think that like your game has to be hard. I don't think your platform has to be mechanically hard to be interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
There's a big series that exemplifies this for me, at risk of starting a different conversation that will just simply link you to instead.
Sure.
But for me, Kirby is fun in part because there is no stakes to the game. And I think that if you lower the stakes of Astro even more, it's more in tune with what the game is trying to accomplish.
Sure.
Just in terms of everything you've been describing, the joy of simply doing. Yeah. The joy in Astro is not overcoming; it's doing. But we did get a comment here. I want to make sure we get through our last two comments as we're wrapping up. But I wanted to read the comment that I've now lost about the boss battles here.
From Mark?
Yes, here it is.
From Mark, the Nintendo nerd on our Discord server.
Yeah, Mark says several things, but I'm just going to zero in on one part because we've covered a lot of this. He just says simply, I found the bosses to be very creative, although they took me several attempts to clear a lot of them. And I'm glad that Mark highlights the bosses in particular because I think they're great.
Yeah.
And they're also not hard.
Yeah, no.
And I think 3 hits is very generous for those. Yeah. I think that you could have gotten away with saying you got to beat these with no hits if you just tweaked those enemy patterns a little bit. But for me, I actually didn't get stuck on any of them. So I differ from Mark in that respect, but I loved fighting them. Yeah. I really liked the chameleon one in particular with the time stopper.
Oh, sure.
I thought that was really cool. Just I think that ability is so novel. Yeah. Baiting his tongue quickly as in time stopper, running up, punching his uvula. He like shoots his saw blades at you and you freeze and jump across them. Like, I think that's really good. And so I understand why there is combat and there is tension in Astro Bot because they're good at these big moments. I just don't think Team Asobias are good at making these big boss fights. I don't think they're as good at just compelling me on a small like trash mob level. So I'd be curious to see an Astro Bot game that strips even more stakes away.
Sure. Yeah. I totally agree. And I think that what is my highlight of Astro Bot, in where I do not levy the same complaints I did against the core like world bosses that are almost entirely reused from previous games, is the mini bosses. Yep. There are not only 5-6 bosses in this game, there are like 20 because there's like 10 plus that are just at the end of a level. Before you get to the goal, you have to beat this big, more level-based guy. Yeah. And I think about the big pirate that like lumbers out of the sand and then like smashes around.
I love like the genie.
The genie level where you're in a tornado.
My favorite, actually, in genre that is really funny, is the 3 chicks that are on top of each other, and you have to suck all of this shit out of them.
It's fucked up, frankly.
Yeah, it's really funny. You got to crack them open with your laser boots, and then you have to suck all the yolk out of them, which is funny. I thought that was great. Yeah, I agree with you.
And I think on a design level, they're visually, I think they're a little bit more interesting, and the fact that they're no two of them are the same mechanically, and you also don't know when one is going to happen. Some levels have them, some of them don't, so it can be a nice little surprise. Those are one of my highlights of the game as well. Because I also think that, again, to my point about this game having good spectacle, these are great. The boss battles are a great example of that, where a couple of the cool moments I remember is one that we played in the demo of that octopus boss, which is a fun boss fight, but the fact that it is only over halfway when you beat him. Yeah. And then you do this cool platforming level where the water is coming at you and you have to wait for it and stuff. And like you feel like you've beaten the boss, and then Asobi like twists it a little bit and they like do this extra thing, or the snake level that I watched, or the snake boss that I watched you fight. I know that one's name, Lady Venomara, because I saw you fight it. Where you do this whole boss fight that I think is actually very similar to one in Rescue Mission. But then the level keeps going because you then are running on top of it. And it's not a very long section, but I like that they have these little spectacle moments. Or like when you're fighting the gorilla and he's on top of this building and he's like slapping around you and you have to knock out his teeth. But then he like rips the building in half and you like slide down, jump across. It's like a 3-second moment, but it's dedication to small moments of spectacle and not locking a boss battle into here's the arena, here's the guy. They can break that occasionally. That makes these feel so dynamic.
Let's talk about the VIP bots.
Yeah.
Then let's wrap up.
Yep.
And then I'm going to eat lunch. I'm hungry.
Yeah. And then I got a thing to do in like 10 minutes. So perfect.
Just rattle off some favorite VIP bots. Quickly, Scruffy says their favorite VIP bot was the Persona 3 Aegis, which was, I guess, cool if you're a weeb and a dork.
Yeah, if you're sicko fuckhead, yeah.
I only have one.
Sure.
I just was happy to see Dante. I was really happy to see him. And then you get Ebony and Ivory.
Yeah.
And you're fighting the Jester, which I think was great. He's my favorite. I also loved finding the Prince from Katamari. Yeah. That was a real banger. I appreciated how much third-party stuff was in here because that actually moved me a little bit more, a lot of it. But in terms of core PlayStation ones, I mean, Last of Us is like my favorite ever from PlayStation. So that was great. Yeah. I loved seeing the Journey bot. Sure. I loved the Trico bot. That's really so cute. Cool.
Yeah. So for me, what I like about the VIP bots is they are. I was saying earlier how cool it is that they're able to meld Astro design with characters and like choose distinctifying features to make it obvious that that's supposed to be whatever character is supposed to be. But I also like they don't limit themselves to that, especially when you're exploring the hub world, which you mentioned earlier that you didn't like. I really loved it in terms of not because it's like a great level, because it does expand and I love watching little guys make their towers and ropes and stuff. And there were some fun puzzles in there, but also that you get these like these VIP bots that are in eggs, and they're never a normal guy. They're always something fucking weird, like Mr. Mosquito,
or which the Humanity Dog, which I love.
Yeah, or Stray, or Aggro, from
or just Spyro,
or just straight up Spyro. Yeah, or Trico, as you mentioned, or just the flower from Flower. Like really I like the fact that they didn't constrain themselves. So those were highlights because none of those had been shown off in marketing. I think people had like mentioned that there was a Spyro one, and that it was just Spyro, but I didn't know how far they would take it, and so those felt really special. Robbit from Jumping Flash, he's just fucking huge. Really but on a like just specific VIP bot level, I really liked that for the celebration levels, they expanded the cast of VIP bots from the certain series. Each of those series, each of the 5 series that they represented, are all series that I love. I love Ape Escape, I love Loco Roco, and I like Horizon, God of War, and Uncharted. And so being a very big fan of all of those series, obviously Loco Roco level, I didn't know about. Very big highlight of the game for me. I love that it is motion controlled.
Yeah, it's great.
It's so unique, and as a Loco Roco fan, I can tell that they cared so much. Even like the little spikes they had, the spikes that you don't want to hit, have this little animation to them where like the spikes kind of go like this, and I'm like, I've played so much Loco Roco, I know that animation, and they mimicked it in 3D. It was so cool. I also like that they shifted between 2D and 3D for that level. But back to the bots, the fact that for Uncharted, it's not just like Drake and Sully. There's Elena, there's Chloe, there's a Sir Francis Drake skeleton bot, which is really cool. You have Sam. For God of War, they chose from Ragnarok, and so you get Kratos and Atreus, but you get Freya and Mimir and Angrboda and Brock and Sindri and Thor and Thrud, and I'm like, oh my god, I love all these characters so much.
And the big funny turtle with the tree on its back.
Yeah. They really picked and they looked at the identity of these games and just fully incorporated them, which I think is really special. And then I like the Oddworld ones because there's 3 of them and they follow each other around. I like. I also like the names that they give them, like a little pun on like their identity.
The Joel one where it's like sometimes he'll tell a white lie is really funny. That's the one that's
hilarious
the most. Most because I didn't read the other ones. I don't know how to read.
For Infamous, they had Cole.
They had Fetch,
and they had Cole, and they had Delson, and they had Fetch, which is crazy. I like my Deacon St. John. I like that. I also like that they chose from some newer stuff as well, and some more stuff that has
Rivet?
like the Rivet, yes, but the little Fall Guys guy there, that Kana from Kana Bridge of Spirits,
Yeah.
and like the little rot will come out of her and like bloop.
And Humanity, which you mentioned already, but
Humanity, Stray.
that game's barely a year old now.
Yeah. It just shows
Yeah.
that it isn't just the big stuff that they care about. This
Yeah.
isn't just Resident Evil and Street Fighter, though even on both of those, there's like little twists. It's the Street Fighter 1 designs for Ken and Ryu, which is kind of cool. The Resident Evil ones have like really funny animations. They covered all their bases, which I think is so impressive to me, especially as someone who did a lot of research about old PlayStation in the last few months. Seeing things like Devil Dice and Intelligent Cube, and Boku no Natsuyasumi, like they did their shit for this game. And they even referenced the sports games and got cool borders, and you got the fact that they did pro soccer back in the day and stuff. And there's Tony Hawk one. Like I just like that they didn't stick to the basics. And they really covered most of the things that people want. It is apparent that they know they're gonna have more, but there's no sweet tooth in this game. Like there are some like major things. It's like, where's the guy? But I think it just shows that there's just still a well that they can dig from.
I agree. As we're wrapping up here, I'm just going to give the last word because it actually encapsulates my final thoughts to Sean Garmer. I'm simply going to pull a single sentence here that they wrote. An absolute joy that had me smiling from beginning to end. And that simple idea for me encapsulates my thoughts on Astro Bot.
Yeah.
I love games that challenge me intellectually or emotionally, whether that's an indie game like Before Your Eyes or a AAA game like The Last of Us Part 2. But mostly I'm playing games that sort of evoke a fun and a wonder and a sense of creativity for me. And I think that Astro Bot has done that for me better than any game that somebody other than Nintendo has made in a long time. So I just totally adored it. And it's either Echoes of Wisdom beats it, or this is my game of the year. So that's Astro Bot to me.
Either one's a good option. I love this game as well. I mean, it was just a joy, and having played and really enjoyed both Rescue Mission and Playroom, it's really fun to see Astro get recognition, and just whether that's from the quality platforming that is there and that is actually most of the game, or the PlayStation stuff that I think really does heighten this game and the sense of celebration that it has, especially in the final moments, and all the little characters are coming along, and you've got a guy riding the iToy, and then the PSP does an attack and you're like dodging around it in your little spaceship. I think it's just a really special game, and it'll be talked about for a long time. And it'll be really cool to see where Asobi takes us next. And I don't know how things line up in terms of how long this generation is going to be. It's possible that we get another game before the generation is out, but I think it's also possible that, like Playroom, we get another launch game of some kind, and hopefully something, if not bigger, but different and pushed alongside the console that can that like a full release game that was alongside the console that would push Asobi, that would push Astro Bot, and I think they know that. So good on you, Asobi. Good on you, Nicholas Doucet. Good on you, everyone who worked on this game.
They somehow made a better game this year than Super Monkey Ball Banana Rumble.
What? I'm just removing a little fuzz.
Surgical fuzz removal.
Yeah, they did surgery on a microphone. They did surgery on a cup.
A cup.
Did you ever do a sport where you had to wear a cup?
No.
Golf?
Did they not make me wear a cup for golf, for indoor track, or for tennis?
Yeah, I guess it's just like it's like only contact sports though, right?
Yeah.
Like, well, do people wear cups from basketball?
No.
So is it just things where there's kicking, or?
Yeah, it's usually like, it's mostly like football, soccer, lacrosse.
Football,
lacrosse.
No, I think we should start calling lacrosse football. I think we just muddy the waters even more.
Right.
I think every country should choose their own
just a sport that they're
going to call football. Yeah, it could be hockey, it could be polo, it could be fucking bobsledding. I don't get skeleton. Skeleton's the one thing that should never be called football because skeleton's too sick as hell. That name is too.
I don't know what that is.
It's like a luge sort of thing, like in a little tube. You like go down an ice tube in a tube.
I think
I'm like, how's that even a sport? I don't get it.
the parameters for a cup is really just like how directly in the line of fire is your cock and balls. So like hockey, you're hitting a slap. You know, a player might hit you, but really it's a slap shot to your testes that they're trying to avoid.
Or the fucking puck. Could you imagine?
No, that's what I'm saying. Because those are hard.
Well, it's all relative. In comparison, they're pretty soft. The pucks.
I shudder to imagine having a cock harder than a hockey puck.
And you see me shuddering all day, every day. Because I'm always imagining.